We have spent more than $2 billion on the greatest scientific gamble in history, and we have won. But the greatest marvel is not the size of the enterprise, its secrecy, or its cost, but the achievement of scientific brains in making it work. And hardly less marvelous has been the capacity of industry to design and of labor to operate the machines and methods to do things never done before. The force from which the sun draws his power has been loosed against those who brought war to the Far East. It is a harnessing of the basic power of the universe. It is an atomic bomb. What has been done is the greatest achievement of organized science in history.
It has the ability to cripple whole sectors of society.
The destructive capabilities are enormous.
It was the advent of weapons of mass destruction and the opening of a Pandora's box to which no one had predicted.
In the 20th century, humanity developed a weapon capable of destroying humanity itself. With literally everything at stake, this weapon of mass destruction suddenly made war unwinnable.
One of the key objectives of war is to destroy an enemy's will to fight, to undermine their psychological desire to defend themselves or to attack you. It's about the ability to deliver the final blow.
So throughout World War II, we saw a lot of micro advancements in weapon systems and technologies, but the breakthrough in nuclear technology was the key game changer in that conflict. Fission is the process where the nucleus of an atom is split into two smaller nuclei, releasing a large amount of energy in the process. And that was significantly more impactful than conventional weapons at the time. It was discovered in Berlin in December of 1938 and caused some alarm given the actions of the burgeoning Nazi state. The Reich basically began to expand throughout Europe. And one of the things they were trying to do is they were trying to grab resources, both human capital, but also resources that would potentially feed into their nuclear or atomic program.
By the end of the war, the Germans were far from delivering a nuclear weapon. But that didn't halt the drive to nuclear fission, with both the Allies and the Soviets actively recruiting physicists to bring their knowledge into their ongoing programs, including the now infamous Manhattan Project.
The Manhattan Project was the effort that was led primarily by the US, the Brits, and the Canadians. It was a collaboration between government, academia, and the private sector to develop true disruptive technologies that gave the Allied side a demonstrable advantage when it came to a nuclear capability. American physicist Jules Robert Oppenheimer was nominated to direct the program in Los Alamos, New Mexico, where on July 16, 1945, they would conduct the Trinity test, when an atomic bomb was detonated for the first time.
The original military objective in developing the atomic bomb was to drop weapons in Germany to show the German population, whose ardent belief was to never surrender, that they could not win against the Allies. Yet the Germans were defeated before the atomic bomb became real. However, the Eastern Theatre was still very much active, and the quasi-religious Japanese fervour in their emperor's divine right to govern meant that they would never surrender. US President Harry S. Truman decided that an atomic detonation was a risk worth taking. So the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were the unfortunate recipients of not one, but two atomic bombs.
With this bomb, we have now added a new and revolutionary increase in destruction.
That an entirely new force had now come under Anglo-American control.
Came the world-shaking explosions of the atomic bomb.
Political reactions seem to have been more widespread than the atomic.
On August 6, 1945, the atomic bomb Little Boy was dropped on Hiroshima. Seventy 70% of the buildings in Hiroshima were destroyed. And over 40% of the population was killed. That's over 80,000 people.
3 days later, in Nagasaki, a city that held 4 major wartime industries, the U.S. dropped the bomb Fat Man, containing 6.2 kilograms of plutonium and a 21 kiloton yield. The initial explosion and its aftermath claimed the lives of up to 40,000 people, with the toll climbing to up to 80,000 over the next few months.
I now invite the representatives of the Emperor of Japan.
The Japanese delegation lines up on the opposite side of the surrender table from the Alliance.
Two bombs, hundreds of thousands of casualties, mostly civilians. This was the new face of war, but many wondered, was this the end of it? Or just the beginning?
Before that fateful day in August 1945, humankind's ability to inflict mortal damage was always relatively limited and predictable. But the atomic bomb changed all that. Nobody knew just how powerful it could be.
One nuclear bomb can destroy a city. Several nuclear bombs can destroy the world. The moment nuclear weapons arrived, every other weapon became conventional.
Nuclear weapons changed the aim entirely. Their ability to deliver devastation with impunity was something that had been previously unimaginable.
The effects are so devastating on a populace that their deployment is both a moral and strategic question. They are usually used only as a last resort. And we really have to take into account the toll on human lives and the generational effects.
Officials state that the U.S. knows of 24 Soviet rocket bases.
We have made our concerns about missile proliferation in South Asia.
To prevent the delivery to Cuba of any further offensive military equipment.
What are the Russians able to do if they want to?
With the need for additional offsetting United States action in order to preserve the sufficiency of our strategic forces.
While no weapon had ever been invented that hadn't eventually been deployed, the consequences of nuclear weapons made war unthinkable. The genie could not be put back in the bottle. So much of the 20th century was spent reshaping the rules of conflict. The alternative to nuclear annihilation became more nuclear weapons.
The Cold War wasn't actually, properly speaking, a war, insofar as it never turned hot and there were no military confrontations between the Soviet Union and the United States. There was an enormous competition, an ideological competition, an economic competition, and of course a military competition. There was an arms race. But the two superpowers never confronted each other on the battlefield, at least not directly.
The reason we never actually got into a hot war or a nuclear war with the Soviets during the Cold War was this concept of mutually assured destruction.
This primarily referred to a system where both countries held nuclear arsenals capable of wiping each other out. If either launched an attack, the other would have the time to counter-launch missiles of its own, so that both sides would be killed while watching the other die. Hardly a traditional military victory.
It was deterrence on a grand scale, mutually assured deterrence based on mutually assured destruction. A phrase coined by Donald Brennan, a strategist working in Herman Kahn's Hudson Institute in 1962. This theory of deterrence has largely been validated through the fact simply that no one launched nuclear weapons against each other throughout those 70 years of the Cold War.
Russian ships steam out from Cuban ports with their decks loaded with missiles. The Soviets are withdrawing under pressure from the New World.
That confrontation is now over. The nuclear threat, while far from gone, is receding.
Once someone starts the spiral of violence, it's hard to stop.
President Clinton and President Yeltsin made a historic joint announcement. We have detargeted all of our strategic nuclear missiles for the first time in almost 35 years.
At the end of the Cold War, the arms race with respect to nuclear weapons took on a different complexion. There was an emphasis on making sure that smaller states that had broken away did not get a hold of nuclear weapons.
There are around 13,000 nuclear weapons that are still stockpiled in the world. The overwhelming majority is controlled by the United States and Russia. Those have roughly 10,000 warheads between them. The remainder are spread through at least 6 countries. China has somewhere around 400. France and the UK have almost 300, or 260 in the UK's case. Pakistan and India have their own arms race between them, with over 150 weapons each. And North Korea is believed to have at least 20 nuclear weapons. Israel is known or expected to have nuclear weapons, but its government has never confirmed this.
A military advantage of using a WMD in warfare is that it could quickly bring that conflict to its culmination. In all calculations, that in the end saves in total number of lives lost.
The destructive capabilities of nuclear weapons are enormous. At the same time, when one looks at the Second World War, 500,000 Germans were killed by Allied bombings. And even in Japan, where 2 nuclear weapons were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, more Japanese died in other cities, namely in fire bombings. In the end, similar results can be achieved by conventional weapons.
But the disadvantages of using WMD are pretty scary. If you let a WMD fall into the wrong hands, well, hey, you only have to look at North Korea. Other disadvantages of WMDs are that they have a large area of effect, and they're indiscriminate. If I were to use a nuclear bomb in a certain place, it would kill everyone there.
Arguably, the most impactful second-order effect of nuclear weapons has been the long-term implication of radiological impacts. The ideas that how these weapons have reached into the soil, into the water ducts, and have infected and imbued our food, our nutrition, our water with aspects of healthcare regimes and infections that last beyond generations, beyond borders, into people that haven't been born yet.
What really distinguishes nuclear weapons, actually, is that they have been designed to not be used. So far, nuclear weapons have been used only twice in history, and we all hope it's not going to happen again. The whole idea of nuclear deterrence is based on the idea that nuclear weapons aren't actually being used.
The first treaty ever that actually eliminated an entire class of U.S. and Soviet nuclear missiles.
When it was clear that nuclear weapons were morally, politically, and logistically a zero-sum game, a new superweapon was needed. The world had changed, and with change came new vulnerabilities to exploit.
Since World War II, we have generally sought ways to develop weapons that were less destructive, but still able to deliver that knockout blow.
Since the end of the Cold War, the nuclear threat hasn't really captured the imagination of the public anymore. The world had moved on, technology boomed, the information age developed that proliferated throughout societies and offered new opportunities.
With the emergence of computer and, most importantly, the internet, a new area of warfare emerged, namely cyber warfare.
Now it was information and its denial that began to attract investment. Exploiting society's dependence on a digitized, connected world, which could be exploited to undermine society's will to fight future battles, even possibly without human loss.
Not only are we increasingly connected to our devices, but those devices have connected us to virtually everyone. When we talk about cyborg theory, or the belief that humans will continue to become increasingly dependent on their technology, the fact is, it's already here. All of us are connected to our phones and other devices in ways we never envisioned. Most of us could not do without them, even for a short period of time.
Everything has been connected at this point, and if this gets knocked out or destroyed, our society might be pushed back into the pre-electric era, and this might, in the end, kill more people than any conventional military attack could.
The definition of weapons of mass destruction is certainly changing today. Previously, we've thought about this as destroying, of killing enemies. Today, it feels more about influencing the will, dealing with the knockout blow to society, stopping people from wanting to fight in the first place. At the heart of the drive to cyber warfare is a desire to disrupt a society to such an extent that it focuses inwardly on overcoming internal or perceived threats rather than responding to an adversary's moves itself.
Our dependence on and connection to these devices really enable any small group or lone actor to take an act that impacts us and interferes with those systems. And they can cause devastating effect. It's like one man has the ability to wage large-scale warfare. And so the ethics now are like, well, how do you stop that? In my opinion, you cannot stop it.
Government computers hacked again. Information of at least 4 million government workers stolen.
An encrypted database storing user passwords has been hacked.
Investigators say many personal computers have been infected with the virus program.
This could provide a roadmap to other sensitive environments and data that they're going after.
In the cyber age, the battleground has pivoted away from physical destruction toward unleashing social and economic chaos by choking off or corrupting the data we all depend on.
So at this point, there are basically 5 domains of warfare, 3 of which are rather old. Land warfare, which has existed since the beginning of humankind. sea warfare, which has also been around for a long time. Aerial warfare really came about during the Second World War or just before that. Space has become the fourth domain with satellites and space-based weapons. And more recently, a fifth domain of warfare has emerged, the cyber realm.
You could argue that cyberspace isn't real, yet the effects and consequences of an attack in cyberspace or the use of a cyber weapon can certainly be felt in the real physical world.
When we look at our world today, we see cyber attacks on banks, state institutions, on pieces of key infrastructure. And for many of those, there's almost certainly a government behind them.
Hackers overwhelm a computer network by flooding it with traffic. Among those websites affected, the Treasury Department and the Secret Service, Pentagon, and New York Stock Exchange.
There are flaws in the tools that we all rely on.
Anyone with a cell phone or internet account knows that cyber attacks are committed almost daily. What if a wide-scale attack were launched by a hostile government with large resources? What happens when cyber attacks evolve into full-scale cyber war?
Just imagine this scenario.
Forces sympathetic to it are responsible. Experts say it's too soon to know just who was behind it. And one says it could be a sign of what's to come.
You're in the office. The first thing you'd notice was your internet started to slow. The time on your computer didn't reflect the real time. Web pages would stop uploading and updating. Your digital life begins to buffer. You might then try and pick up your mobile phone, but it doesn't link to local networks because the navigation and timing sequences that it relies on have all been disrupted and destroyed. Your link to the world, your phone, isn't working. Your life is now giving you a constantly engaged tone. Getting a bit frustrated now, you might go to the TV to find out what's happening, but those signals would no longer be received because terrestrial broadcast is now fully digital and relies on timing and connectivity, things that can be attacked and unpicked by cyber. Panicking a little now, you might switch on the radio, but radios, again, are digital, and those are also lost in this attack. With no connection to the world around you, you try and get home.
There are different types of cyber attacks. Criminal attacks, cyber espionage, sabotage, and then also the use of cyber for psychological operations. Cyber espionage is when an actor breaks into a system and gathers a lot of information, sometimes over weeks and months and years.
Cyber espionage involves spear phishing or botnets to compromise security systems and steal secrets and other sensitive information. The Chinese have specialized in this recently, stealing American designs for sophisticated aircraft and technology and replicating them.
Cyber sabotage means that you infiltrate the system. There are different ways to do that, and basically destroy or sabotage the system from within.
How vulnerable are the computers of government officials in the West?
They are a threat. Not only will this keep happening, it will get worse and worse and worse.
The criminals are untraceable. High-tech businesses are vulnerable.
This happened in the UK in 2023, where we saw Chinese agents being identified as exfiltrating information from the UK Parliament back to China.
So there's been a bit of press reporting recently about a compromise or an attack on the IT systems of the Sellafield nuclear facility. The investigations right now are ongoing, but there are strong implications or belief that Chinese and/or Russian actions or actors were behind this attack.
This is the first worm designed to damage the physical world and critical infrastructure in particular.
Fully crafted worm took down the nuclear program of Iran.
Certainly was and still is, the worst physical attack we've seen where, destruction was what the adversary actually had in mind.
Perhaps the most famous is the Stuxnet virus attack on the Iranian nuclear program, infecting their systems. making their centrifuges spin beyond tolerance and affected the constituent components, rendering the weapons unusable. It was a clever, witty, devastating attack, and all done without the loss of life.
One aspect is economic cyber attacks. Basically what that means is an attack on an institution, usually a bank or a business or a payment system, that's meant to either pilfer money, freeze accounts, or prevent people from being able to transact, and in essence basically shutting down an economy.
Corporately funded or otherwise funded, to reach Russian audience, to talk to the people.
Someone else put a picture of the district attorney next to him, and in an article...
He uses Twitter more to speak to the people than he does
to discuss the future of social media. Each of you is fulfilling it.
Our everyday technology has made each one of us a potential soldier on a cyber battlefield. And when the cyber war begins, we can all become casualties.
Cars have stopped moving. Everything is gridlocked. People are crashing. Drivers are arguing. As you try to get down to the metro station, you realize that the metro had stopped running. There are no signals, no power. People can't get in and out. You try to withdraw some cash, but all the ATMs are down. There's now widespread disbelief that everything could slow down and stop. And eventually you might make your way home, having walked for miles through this devastation of people just not knowing what really was happening.
So what you're starting to see is basically the collision of cyber warfare and conventional warfare. As more and more devices on the battlefield are interconnected and communicating with each other, you have more endpoints or more edge devices that can be compromised by a malicious actor or a hacker or a bad actor. You can't hack a sword or a sling or a catapult, but if you're looking at a weapon system or a drone or a vehicle that's relying on that interconnectivity, if you hack that network, if you hack that system, you've basically taken that resource off the battlefield.
In 2014, when Russia attacked Crimea, they first began with a cyber attack to soften up the target, followed by the use of conventional forces.
We did find not an insignificant amount of fraud.
3 Russian companies seeking to interfere in the United States political system.
A spy working in their company writing software to change the outcome of the election.
Both parties are desecrating the American democracy.
The computer hacking group Anonymous is the supposed creator.
The modern use of cyber warfare is not just given in simple attacks. The sophistication of psychological profiling and misinformation to socialize and engineer election outcomes or vote rigging is also possible.
Let's take a look at the alleged recent interference by Russia and China on U.S. elections. Russian and Chinese actors were able to get on social media and amplify certain themes or use bots to change people's calculations. And ultimately, their efforts did not have a dramatic effect. But the psychological impact made that an act of psychological war.
These also may have a secondary effect that is inciting rebellions within their country, which often end up in chaos and violence, some even having fatal consequences.
Massive cybersecurity breach of our government.
Massive cybersecurity breach against federal agencies.
His malicious cyber activities began more than 10 years ago.
Hacking group believed to be connected to Russian intelligence services has been attempting to break into entities that are developing a vaccine for the coronavirus.
When cyber attacks escalate to cyber warfare, the weapon of mass destruction won't be a bomb being dropped, it'll be a plug that's pulled. But like a hydrogen bomb, its indiscriminate effect will ripple outward, causing long-term widespread damage. The battles are no longer in far-flung fields conducted by military forces, but in the homes and businesses of every civilian.
Your family is suddenly without light, without television, without radio, without any form of connectivity. Nothing in the house that relied on electricity, on any kind of signal worked. The inability for landlines to function as well as mobile phone networks. and you get home. Your family is there saying there's no water coming through the taps, that all of the water is gone, that it's all stopped working. You go to the loo, it's not flushing. The effluent is left there, it's being backed up. The smell becomes unbelievable. The sounds coming from outside, starting with the panicking, the arguments, the disbelief, followed perhaps quickly by looting and rioting. The sense of uncertainty, the inability to process what is happening, the disbelief that such a thing could happen in a modern society today.
Hurricane Katrina is closing in on the Louisiana coast now.
One of the largest relief efforts in our nation's history, and the federal government's got an important role to play.
With Hurricane Katrina, we learned that American citizens, regular people, after 72 hours of no electricity, no access to services or water or sewage, that they turned to savagery. And this would be repeated in every major developed nation. If you either shut off the water or stop people's ability to have their waste carried away at any large city around the world. Just 3 days, people would be turning on each other. It's like an apocalyptic movie.
If you cut off an entire civilization, they can't feed themselves, they can't get access to food and water. If you cause significant domestic unrest within the country, the worst case scenario is you have people turning on each other and killing each other. You've now, in essence, basically debilitated your adversary without firing a single shot.
The situation became increasingly violent. Missiles and bottles were thrown, causing several injuries.
It's not clear what exactly prompted this incident.
Gangs of boys armed with stones played cat and mouse with the police in North Belfast this evening.
It's a scenario that's both sinister and elegant. Deprived of resources, comforts and information, no one will know where to turn or whom to trust. It wouldn't take long for society to break down.
You decide to leave the city. You pack up a few quick belongings and you go down to the garage to get into your car. You press the fob, nothing happens. It's like the battery has died in it. There's no connectivity. The lights don't flash, nothing is moving. You get out the physical key and try and undo the doors. And once you get in, you insert the key. Will it start? How dependent is your car on connectivity? And when it looks like things can't get any worse, you start to understand that your life may be at higher risk than you thought.
Until now, all violence on Syria's streets was unverifiable, but we witnessed this firsthand.
The city centre was littered with burnt-out wreckage, guarded by tanks.
Billowing clouds of tear gas filled the streets across the capital.
A number have already been killed as darkness falls on a city in chaos.
Victimised by this colossal failure of technology, you might never even know who is responsible. Is it a tragic technical problem? The work of a rogue state, or your own government? When everything falls apart, who can you really trust?
A term that you're starting to see really used in the realm of cyber warfare and cyber attacks is this concept of false flag operations. The actual concept false flag goes back to kind of the golden age of piracy, where the Portuguese, the French, the English, and the Spanish were attacking each other's fleets in the Americas using false flags, a pirate flag, or in some cases presenting another country's flag on their ships to shift blame away.
Up until recently, we thought that cyber attacks against governmental entities or large corporations could only be conducted by nation states. That has changed. Now we know that groups of hackers called hacktivists, small individuals working together, or even a lone hacker can create devastating effect.
When you talk about large-scale attacks to debilitate a critical infrastructure of a nation, that often requires collaboration with a larger number of hackers and resources that just are not available to the individual. So if you're looking at a major attack against a nation state, it's probably going to require some sort of a direct or indirect backing by a nation state proxy.
With all these cyber attacks going on, you might ask, are we constantly in a state of cyber war? Maybe this is the new Cold War of our era.
I think society is on the dawn of a new arms race where it's about really creating and expanding a suite of very disruptive technologies that are going to reshape the battle space. That there is no winning that conflict, and the concept of mutual destruction will hopefully keep us at bay and prevent us from getting to a much bigger conflict.
What you're starting to see is some real differentiation between internet companies that are trying to build lasting companies.
Google and Facebook and Apple and Microsoft.
How technology can transform a market. When applied in the right ways and at the right pace, technology can transform an industry, really any industry.
On the cyber battlefield, innovation comes from corporations, not governments. The arms race is controlled by these international conglomerates, and as we increasingly depend on these companies, they gain more power over our lives. Even governments have found themselves beholden to these big corporations, unaware of their agendas.
One fundamental change in warfare that we're currently witnessing is that more and more private actors, private civilian companies really, are involved in military operations. And in the cyber realm, companies dominate the cloud and dominate the cyber realm.
The amount of money the Defense Department has to spend is somewhat finite. If you look at Apple, for example, the R&D budget for Apple in some cases exceeds the defense budgets of so many other countries. It really underscores the power of private wealth to fuel some of these next-generation technologies that are going to not only reshape modern warfare, but completely reshape society and how we live.
So now you have companies or CEOs that have the capability to conduct cyber warfare at their disposal. Do these individual companies or CEOs have the same ethical concerns or the same checks and balances on those that governments and democracies have?
The problem is that companies aren't democratically elected governments. Often it isn't even clear which nation a company belongs to or feels like it belongs to. So we are witnessing a change in the power dynamic between states and private companies that are becoming ever more powerful and ever more influential.
While those private companies are working in strict collaboration with governments, there may not be reason for alarm. But what if an enemy country will offer more? Will they turn their weapons against the government and overthrow it? And will we see this sci-fi scenario of civil societies being effectively ruled by corporations?
It begins with a simple USB key, then with surgical precision, penetrates some of the world's most advanced computer security.
I think these are going to get worse as we look at more and more nation states.
You could basically take down a country just by cyber attacking it.
Cybercrime has a devastating impact. This is the cyber war, not a new conflict, but an ever-developing battle.
These are compelling questions, and though it may be too early to answer them, history has shown us that we should be wary of unfettered technological advancement without careful oversight, lest the next advancement is the new Pandora's box. Once opened, impossible to close.
The reality is that weapons of mass destruction, WMDs, are not quite as precise as they seem. The ripples and impacts of their use go far beyond the intended victim.
Some governments seek ways to minimize collateral damage, but still have a great impact. This is one reason why cyber warfare may be a weapon of choice. With cyber warfare, they have the ability to employ precision at scale with devastating effect.
Governments and corporations are starting to take the issue of cybersecurity very, very seriously. You're starting to see billions and billions of dollars being spent.
And it's why we're investing £2.5 billion in quantum computers.
Quantum memory is a building block for future Army quantum networks.
When it comes to technology that will shape the future, like quantum computing, artificial intelligence, the UK and the US are working together to make sure they are developed safely.
How can we assure that the algorithms which are being developed are the ones which are for the good of humanity?
For every new cyber advance, there are hackers out there trying to crack it. As cyber technology grows more sophisticated, so does cybersecurity. And so far in this arms race, the good guys supposedly are winning. Still, a future of cyber warfare where systems are under the threat of constant untraceable attacks affecting the civilian population may already be on our doorstep.
Consider the enormous impact of the second-order effects of a large-scale cyber attack. It has the ability to cripple whole sectors of society and destroy human life large-scale. It's no wonder that companies and nations are spending billions of dollars to protect their critical infrastructure.
But they need to think ahead since new technologies are advancing fast and may become game changers. So two technologies that are going to reshape and impact conflict and warfare are going to be breakthroughs in artificial intelligence and machine learning, as well as quantum computing.
When we say artificial intelligence, we mean machine learning. It revolves around a system that's able to process, synthesize, manage, and make decisions using large amounts of data.
If you take an AI system and you train it to attack a certain password that has 256-bit military encryption, it could take all the supercomputers you throw at it weeks, if not months, to crack that code. In the meantime, that attack can be theoretically identified, spotted, mitigated, and addressed without it leading to compromise.
Yet, this can change with the breakthrough of quantum computing. While regular computers work based on regular binary code, that's the classic O's and ones, quantum computing operates in qubits. That superimposes those O's and ones and can process certain information 158 million times faster than a regular computer.
Now, if quantum computing will work as it is predicted, this will mean many things, but militarily speaking, the biggest immediate risk that experts see is that quantum computing could lead to the breaking of encryption protocols as we know them. Quite quickly, all encryption, say of communication or nuclear codes, could be broken and be open to different actors.
Look at Amazon, look at Microsoft, look at Google. They're all spending billions and billions of dollars in AI, quantum computing.
When we talk about artificial intelligence, some of the fears are that we can't control it, that it will get to a point where it wants to control itself at that time. There are those that argue that AI will be able to incorporate that, but at this point, I still feel that we need a human heart, a human mind, human compassion, and human empathy to make those decisions.
Because artificial intelligence and machine learning are being conducted by companies that are largely aligned to society's values and beliefs, the big difference might come in the advent of quantum computing, having the ability to change the dynamics as far as the impact and devastation which cyber could potentially bring to societies that are more and more dependent on connectivity.
Nations do not distrust each other because they are armed. They are armed because they distrust each other.
Annihilation of any life on Earth
case being bold within the range of technical possibility.
My fellow Americans, tonight we're launching an effort which holds the promise of changing the course of human history.
Now's an opportunity to do generations a favor by holding them accountable.
This civilization may go under. We need to ask ourselves whether we're doing all we can to avert that. In our response to these realities, there is hope for peace.
The history of warfare has always been an arms race, and in the last 2 centuries, as that race has sped up, we have seen more unintended, potentially devastating consequences. Progress means moving forward, but to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past, we should take the time to fully consider where the road we're on may take us, and who's paying the fare.
The biggest transferable lesson from Oppenheimer as the father of nuclear weapons to today is the idea that very few people hold the power in their hands. Cyber is done by specialists. They require the detailed knowledge of people who sit in small cubicles with supercomputers deciding how to break down societies using specialist payloads. It's that same small group of people that Oppenheimer used in developing these capabilities, but not in waging them. This isn't a democratized case of decision-making. It's not soldiers fixing bayonets or charging machine gun boats. This is the people sitting in ivory towers, in national capitals, who are deciding when to hit the enter key and sow destruction.
Are we going to fall into a system of control of the masses by the few? This includes corporations and a select few governments. Or do we want to create a network of libertarian and decentralized states that are interreliant but each have control of their own destiny? It is up to us to choose.
One of the deepest concerns we should have about the future of warfare is in it following society's trends and patterns. The key of those at the moment seems to be the withdrawal of human-to-human contact. This idea that potentially we stop making warfare a human endeavor changes the very nature of war and conflict as we understand it.
So maybe going forward, we should make it an intentional effort where we pause and think and consider the ramifications of the choices we are constantly making.